We're on Daf Yud Beis, today's Daf, and we're up to B'maika Mifligi, which is approximately 9 lines down from the top of the Amud. What is the essence of this machlokes between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda? Tanakam Sovar Yushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim. The reason why there's no tumas tzaras, the Torah says with regard to tzaras habatim, it's got to be achuzaschem. But Jerry, I just want to, because he came a minute before, it's 9 lines down from the top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and you'll see the words Yushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim. And this is the Tanakam Shita, that Yerushalayim was not owned by anyone. We'll see what that means.
Thank you.
And Rabbi Yehuda Sava, Yerushalayim nischalka l'shvatim, that Yerushalayim, like the rest of Eretz Yisrael, with the exception of the Beis Hamikdash, was divvied up amongst the shvatim. And part of Yerushalayim was in the Chelik of Binyamin, another part was given to Shevet Yehuda, and therefore the word achuzaschem in the parsha of Negoim Batim applies, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to Yerushalayim. Ubeplukted nahani panoi. And if you want to go back to the original machlokas about the status of Yerushalayim, we go to the following brisa. Ma haya bechelko shel Yehuda. We're assuming now that Yerushalayim was divvied up amongst the shvatim. And we're going to try to figure out which part of Yerushalayim was given to Yehuda, which part was given to Binyamin. And that would reflect the Shita Rabbi Yehuda, that there is Tumas Negoim, and it's called Achuzaschem regarding Yerushalayim. And the following list of 2 areas was given to Shevet Yehuda. Harabayis, Beha-Azoros. And we know that in the Azara was the Mizbeach. And we're going to see a whole sugya here about how Binyamin was so upset that the Mizbeach was not in his chelik. Ma haya bechelko sheBinyamin, Binyamin got the Ulam, the Hechal, and the base Kodshei HaKadoshim. Now, when we say that Binyamin is an upgrade, he got even a better chelik than Yehuda. There is a lot of truth to that because he gets the Ulam, which is already the 11 amos that leads you into the Hechal. He got the Hechal, where the Mizbeach HaPnimi was, and he got the Kodesh Kadoshim. What could be holier than that? But he didn't get the Azar. And what that means is, when we talk about Azara, you'll see here in the language of the Bryce, it says Azaros in the plural, because there are in effect 3 different Azaros. There's the Ezras Noshim, there's the Ezras Anoshim, and then the Ezras Kohanim. And the Ezras Noshim had a level of Kedusha, but lower than the Kedusha of the Ezras Anoshim. And the highest level of Kedusha in Azaros was the Ezras Kohanim, where you were only allowed to enter in there for the sake of the Mizbeach that was located in the Ezras Kohanim. The Kohanim were there to do the Avodah, or Yisrael could come in there when he had to bring his korban. And all of that, those 3 Azaros were singled out for the territory of Yehuda. And of course, if you go beyond the 3 Azaros, towards the east, meaning towards Yerushalayim itself, you're on the Harabais. That too was designated for Shevet Yehuda. But going from east to west, towards the Kodesh, Yehuda included in his inheritance, in his territory, the Azara. That's what it seems to indicate. From the Azara on, where you're going west, into the Beis Hamikdash, you're first going into the Ulam, then into the Heichal, and finally the Kodesh Kadosh, and that's all designated exclusively for Shevet Binyamin. However, Ritzua Hoise Yotzes Michelko Shel Yehuda V'nichneses Lechelko Shel Binyamin. There was a strip of territory that in theory could have been part of Binyamin's chelik, but yet it was an extension into Shevet, the portion of Binyamin, but it was designated and included in the portion of Shevet Yehuda. And that is where Uba Hoya Mizbeach Bon. That was a section that initially should have been allotted to Binyamin because Binyamin gets the Kodesh. And that part of the Azorah, which has the Mizbeach in it, was Kodesh. And it should have been included in Shevet Binyamin. But it was Nichneses Lechelko, and it was Ritzua Yotzeis Michelko Shel Binyamin. Chelko Shel Yehud. So Yehuda gets this strip of land that extends into the land of Binyamin. Now, we have the Beis Hamikdash, and it's comprised of three sections. We have the Ulam, we have the Heichal, and we have the Kodesh Kadosh. But Yehuda's territory included the eastern part of the Beis Hamikdash, meaning going from the west, let's say the Ulam is the most west, going beyond that towards the east, that was all included in the territory of Yehuda. Now, as far as the Mizbeach is concerned, which was on the eastern side, Binyamin's territory embraced the western part of the complex, and now we have a demarcation line, a border that is set up between the territory of Binyamin and the territory of Yehuda, and it ran towards the east of the Mizbeach. And that means that if that line was to the east of the Mizbeach, then the Mizbeach itself was towards the west, and it should have been included in the chelik of Binyamin. And therefore, the chelik of Binyamin, which is west, should begin with the Mizbeach, then go to the Ulam, and then the Heichal and the Kodesh Kadoshim. Now, when you go towards the east, then you have 22 amos of area for the Kohanim and for the what we call the Ezras Yisrael. And then you get to the Ezras Noshim, the women's courtyard, as it's called. And this is all the eastern segment of the Har Habayis, and it was designated for Shevet Yehuda. Now, the line that divides the Azorah into two parts, west for Binyamin and east for Yehuda, it wasn't a strip, it wasn't a straight line, but rather it was a line that dipped one amma towards the west, meaning the line included an extra amma of territory in so-called east, meaning in Binyamin's, in Yehuda's territory. So that's a strip of land that, although it extends westward, it was included in the east. So the east is expanding to the west, and it's included a certain area which is called an amma on the western side, and that is an area of the Yesod HaMizbeach that was in Yehuda's territory. And because it was contiguous to Yehuda's territory, it was an open area. And it means that although the Yesod HaMizbeach surrounded the Mizbeach theoretically on all four sides, L'maisa, in actuality, it only surrounded the Mizbeach on 3 out of 4 sides. And on one side, it was open towards the territory of Yehuda. Now, I'll just read to you a short summary here in the English translation. He writes that the Yesod HaMizbeach, had it completely encircled the Mizbeach, would have extended into the territory of Yehuda for a depth of 1 amma, which would be on the eastern side of the Mizbeach. And now you are setting up a Yisod on the eastern side of the Mizbeach, which would have entered into the east, which is dedicated for Yehuda by 1 amma. And therefore, what we did was we surrounded the Mizbeach on 3 out of 4 sides with a Yisod, but the base of the Mizbeach did not extend along the eastern side of the Mizbeach, because that was a strip of territory that was somehow connected to the east, 1 amma into the area of the Mizbeach, and it belonged to Shevet Yehuda. So that when it says in the Brisa that the Mizbeach was built in the territory of Yehuda, that's not exactly to be taken literally. It's only 1 amma on the eastern side of the Mizbeach, which is really just the Yesod HaMizbeach, which was 1 amma, and that was dedicated to Yehuda. But the altar itself, meaning the Mizbeach, was in Shevet Binyamin, but he was upset, Binyamin, because now the extension of the Mizbeach, which means the Yesod, the base of the Mizbeach, was not a perfect square, in a sense, all belonging to Binyamin, but part of it, a strip of land, was given over to Yehuda. Ubinyamin Atzadik, now this is a sugya in Masechet Shabbos that indicates that there were 4 people throughout history that were tzaddikim, they never sinned, and one of them is Binyamin, so therefore he's called Binyamin Atzadik. Every day he wanted to somehow swallow up this extra amma, that strip, into his territory, so that the entire Yisod of the Mizbeach, including the eastern flank, would be included in Shevet Binyamin, and therefore the Yisod HaMizbeach would circle the entire Mizbeach on all 4 sides. And what's the pasuk that indicates that Binyamin was anguished about this? Shenemar, and here we turn to the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of the Torah, and it says Chofeif alav kol hayom. The word Chofeif means to agonize, and kol hayom means on every day Binyamin would agonize over the fact that the entire Mizbech was not in his chelik, but part of it, meaning that Yisod, was in the Ritzua Yotzeis mi Chelko shel Yehud. And Moshe Rabbeinu realized that Binyamin was in a state of anguish, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu now blesses Binyamin. Lefichach zocher Binyamin atzadik v'naseh ushpizchan ligvura, which means that although Yehuda may have technically gotten part of the Mizbeach because his chelek had a strip that invaded the area of the Mizbeach, but nevertheless the Shechina was not over the Mizbeach. Where was the Shechina? The Shechina was in the Heichal. The Shechina was in the Kodesh Kodashim. All of that area was in Binyamin's territory. Shenemar, as the pasuk says again in Zos HaBracha, ubein kseifav shachen, literally between his shoulders does God rest. And now the Brisa, offering a description of the division of the area of the Migdash between Ben Yehuda and Binyamin, absolutely reflects the shita that Yerushalayim nischalka l'shvatim. So the Gemara now is looking for a Tana that disagrees. V'hai Tana Savar, but we're going to quote a different Brisa to reflect the contrary opinion, that Yerushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim, it was never divvied up as a territory amongst the various shvatim. The Sanya we have. Okay, now a little bit of background to the Brisa that we're about to learn. If I own a home in Yerushalayim, then if I rented out or rent out a room in my home, I could charge rental fees. And when the Ole Regolim came on mass for Alila Regel, the 3 Regolim, they were looking for places to stay overnight, and they wanted to rent homes in Yerushalayim. The halacha of, according to that opinion, we'll see it's going to be the opinion of Rabbi Lozer, is this Yerushalayim lo nischalko l'shvatim, which means that your ownership rights over a piece of property, over a home in Yerushalayim is limited. There was no absolute chalukah to give you total ownership. And therefore, if the Ole Regel are invited into your home to stay overnight, you cannot charge them rental fees. You don't have that level of ownership. Sanya ein maskirim but in Yerushalayim, we cannot rent that house in Yerushalayim. Lefisha eina shalahem. The owners do not have full-fledged ownership in order to charge rental fees. And Rabbi Lazar, Reb Tzadok expands this. He says, af lo mitos. Let's say you don't want to rent out the karka, meaning the room itself. You want to rent out a bed. You can't charge them for the bed also, because the bed is connected to the karka, and the karka is not land that you own because it belongs to all the shvatim. Lefichach, oros kodshim baliush bezichin notlino som bizroa. Chazal made a takana that when the Ole Regel came and they brought karbanos and they were given the hides, the oros, as part of their chelik in the carbon, they would have to designate it for the hosts because the hosts were not being reimbursed and paid rental fees. And the Rabbanim make a takana that whether these guests like it or not, the hides will go to the owners of the homes, the hosts. And that was meant to encourage the hosts to allow the Ole Regel to live in their apartments. They would not be able to charge rent, but at least they got some compensation in the oros. Now, from the fact that in this brisa, it's clear that you cannot rent out and collect rental fees over your homes in Yerushalayim, it means Yerushalayim lo nischalka l'shvatim. Omar Abaye, Abaye wants to derive a moral lesson from this brisa. Oreach ara, if someone is a guest in someone's home, it is appropriate lemishvach inish gulfa umashkalush pizza. Let's say you buy a jug of milk, and the jug is worth a certain amount of money. It's not a lot of money. You finish the milk, you leave the jug for your ishpazicha, for your host. And that is a way, or the hides of animals, that's a way of expressing your gratitude to the host. We would call it today a tip. And now we're going to go back to a discussion that we had in the previous daf, and that is whether or not synagogues are included in Achuzaschem as far as the parsha of Tumas Negoy Batim are concerned. And we previously distinguished between a synagogue in an urban area, in a metropolis in a city. That's not called Beis Achuzaschem, and that's not included in Tumas Tzaras because it is owned by the whole Welt. Anybody can come in and daven in those shuls, but in the Kfarim, the smaller hamlets and villages, there is Tumas Negoyim because it's like a bias of Shutfim, which we said is included on the Beis Achuzaschem, because the synagogues in a small town are owned by the people in the town. They're not open to the world itself. So the Gemara says, I have a brisa that'll prove to us that a synagogue in a kfar is not makabel tumas negoyim. The brisa says, lachuza, the Torah says that when you enter into Eretz Canaan, I'm giving you an inheritance, an achuza. And the Brisa derives from the word achuza, ad sheyichbeshu osa. There were 14 years. When Yoshua embarked, he crossed the Jordan River. There were 7 years of kibush, followed by 7 years of chiluk. And during that period of time, no one really owned the land. It was not privately owned, and therefore there was no tumas negoim. And the Torah says, le'achuza. Kavshu osa, after the 7 years, v'lo chilkul shvatim. It hadn't yet been divided up amongst the shvatim. And even after chilkul shvatim, lo chilkul beis avos, there was never an ownership at this point of any family over the land of Israel. Chilkul beis avos, now they took the land that was designated for a shevet, and they divided up into beis avos. And they divided such that each beis av would get its allocated portion of Eretz Yisrael, but ein kol echad makiris chelka. It was divided amongst the batei avos, the households, but not to each individual. Is minayin, how do we know that even though we've passed that stage of chiluk of batei avos, is at the end of the 14 years, nevertheless there's no tumas negoim, tamid lomer uba asher lo abayis, misha miyuchad lo, yotza elu shenim yuchadim lo. We see here that tumas saras does not apply unless it's miyuchad lo. It's yours, and that's going to only take place at the very end of the 14 years of chiluk, when the batei avos divided up amongst each individual per capita. Then it's a bias that's low and it's susceptible to tumas negoim. But in the case of a beis knesses, even if it's only in a small rural area, a little village or a hamlet, it's a kfar, but nevertheless it's not miyuchad lo. No one could say, well, I own this beis haknesses. Therefore, in order to reconcile the two contradictory brisos about whether or not a beis haknesses is makabel tumas negoim, we're going to accept the other interpretation that depends whether the chazan haknesses has his own private quarters in the beis knesses, and that makes it achuza, then it's private ownership. The brisa that says that a synagogue will not be makabel tumas negoim doesn't have a chazan with his own private quarters. The Mishnah says misaknina lo kohen acher, that during this period of pre-shav, 7 days before Yom Kippur, we designate a second string substitute kohen. Pshita iralo bopsul konim tomin shel shachar. Now, what happens in order for the second string kohen gadol to be able to take over the avoda? If the first kohen gadol became pasul, he needs what's called chinuch. He needs to be invested with the status of a kohen gadol. How does that happen? Well, it's not a problem if he replaces the kohen gadol before the Tamid Shel Shachar, because then the Kohen number 2 that they established as the second string Kohen will wear the big day Kohen Gadol, the big day Zahav, and he will dedicate himself to the avoda of the Tamid Shel Shachar. So even before he gets to the avodas Yom Kippurim, he's already been invested with the status of the Kohen Gadol. But Ella, the Gemara wants to know, if the Kohen Gadol number 2 is replacing the Kohen Gadol after the avodah of the Talmud was complete, it's also. How could he now embark the second Kohen Gadol on the avodah, on the service of Yom Kippurim? He's not a Kohen Gadol. He hasn't been invested with what we call chinuch, investiture, as a Kohen Gadol. Amar Rabbi Adabar Ava Avneit, even though he's not wearing the special begadim of the Kohen Gadol, namely the big day zav, but he's wearing the avneit, and the avneit of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim was not a mixture of linen and wool; it was pure linen, and it had no kilayim in it. Whereas the avneit of a Kohen Hedjot which he wore, an ordinary rank and file citizen Kohen, the whole year round when he did the avoda, that avneit had kilayim in it. It was made, the belt was made of a mixture of linen and wool, which is a machlokas, but we're going according to that man the Yoma. And therefore, when the Kohen number 2 steps into the shoes of the Kohen number 1, and he puts on 4 begadim, one of which is the avneit, and this avneit is not kilayim, he's obviously wearing begadim that are unique to the Kohen Gadol. An avneit without kilayim in it, that's unique to the Kohen Gadol. And that itself is going to give him chinuch. Hanicha, that makes sense. L'man di'omer avneito shel Kohen Gadol zehu avneito shel Kohen Hedjot, which means that the Kohen Hedjot, just 1 second, that the Kohen Hedjot the whole year round would wear, just 1 second, I'm sorry, I need a minute just to get the mathematics here. We're holding now that the substitute Kohen Gadol was wearing a different avneit. And that makes sense if your ordinary Kohen wore an avneit that was made of kilayim, right? How do you? That's what we said, but how do you fit that into the words of the Gemara? Avneito shel Kohen Gadol zeh, zehu avneito shel Kohen Hedjot. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I have the mathematics here. In other words, that on Yom Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol would wear an avneit of linen and what? And I got it. Right. So we're holding now that the Kohen Hedjot wore an avneit that had kilayim. And the Kohen Gadol is wearing an avneit of linen. So in that sense, we could say that the pure linen belt of the Yom Kippurim avoda was unique to the Kohen Gadol, So again, how do we translate the words? But avneito shel Kohen Gadol, I think what he means is that since the entire year, both the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot would wear the same avneit, meaning an avneit with shatnez in it, and on Yom Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol wore a unique avneit which had no kilayim in it. Therefore, that's chinuch. El l'mad yom avneito shel Kohen Gadol, lo zeu avneito shel Kohen Hedjot, which means that the Kohen Gadol the whole year round would wear kilayim in his avneit, but the avneit of the Kohen Hedjot was pure linen. He was not allowed to wear shatnez in his avneit, according to that Madiomen. When the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is wearing an avneit of pure linen, he's wearing the exact same belt that was worn by the Kohen Hedjot the whole year round, because the Kohen Hedjot, according to this Madiomen, is not allowed to wear shatnez. Is my equal Meimar. Now it's stuck again. How do we have a chinuch of the Kohen Gadol sheni? Amar Abaye love shmona umahapech b'tzinora. What the Kohen Gadol is going to do on Yom Kippurim, the fill-in Kohen Gadol, he's going to wear the shmona begadim, and he's going to turn over part of the tamid on the mizbeach. And that's going to be his chinuch, meaning he took over for the first Kohen Gadol after the Kohen Gadol Rishon had already placed the tamid on the eish, but There's another avoda, says Abaye, to turn over the tamid, the meat of the tamid, on the mizbeach, and that's called an avoda. And when the Kohen Gadol does that avoda, that single avoda, wearing the big day zav of a Kohen Gadol, that itself is chinuch. Ukir Rav Huna, the Omer Rav Huna zar shahavach b'tzinora chayav misa. If a non-Kohen would implement a turning over the basar on the mizbeach, he's chayav misa, because then it's considered like he usurped the avoda of a Kohen. Because even the simple act of turning over the Avarim and the Emurim from one side to the other in order to facilitate its burning on the Mizbech, that too is called an Avoda.